Hey, everybody. Welcome. This is your support staff here from the middle school, and we're going to present Parent Power Hour. It's our next session. This is January, and we're going to be talking about grief and loss tonight, all kinds of loss. And so first, we're going to introduce ourselves, and then I'll be sharing my screen, and we'll be going through some information tonight, and there will be time for questions if there were people here, but we are recording. So I'm Martha Deerstein, and I'm the counselor at Horizon Middle School.
I'm Mike Black. I'm the counselor at Vista Middle School.
Hi, I'm Terry Saunders, intervention specialist at both Vista and Horizon Middle School.
Hi, I'm Bryce Larson. I am the school counseling intern at Horizon Middle School with Martha Deerstein.
Hello, I'm Jackie Posner. I'm the Communities and Schools Site Coordinator at Horizon Middle School. And our colleague Dina Lane is the Site Coordinator with Communities and Schools at Vista, but she couldn't be here tonight.
So welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're here. So I'm going to share my screen. So just bear with me for a second. Yep. Does it look right, everybody?
Looks great.
Great. So tonight we're talking about navigating grief and finding hope in the time of COVID, and that's all kinds of loss and grief. So I will get this to work. I can't use my little cursor. All right. Oh. So tonight we're going to be talking about, we did our introductions, some of your support staff. We'll be talking about what grief is and losses due to COVID, stages of grief, coping and helping your family cope, and other resources. And there will be time for questions. If we had people with us tonight, we'd be asking questions. And I'm going to see if I can put speaker view on, Bryce, because all I see is you right now. Maybe I'll just hide you. There we go. So, oh, let me go back and show that one slide. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And I think we can all relate to that because we're certainly not in charge of what's going on right now, but we have to figure out how to make the best of things. So first of all, tonight, Mike, are you going to talk to us about what grief is?
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. So yeah, what is grief? Grief is a natural response to any loss or difficult change. And so common losses that we see with kids and adults, but right now we're going to focus on middle school kids mostly, is the couple first two are pretty obvious to, I think, to most people: the death of a loved one, human and animal alike. And boy, I'm glad that we added animal, because losing pets can be a big issue for anybody, especially kids. And then also separation, divorce of parents, moving to a new town or new school or a new living situation, chronic illness, that could be the flu, it could be COVID, it could be cancer, a number of things that last more than just the flu, job loss or employment change. Unfortunately, that's been in place for many families in our country since March, April. That's affected the whole family, of course. Children or siblings leaving home, that's not always a grief issue, but for some kids it is. And then we purposely put in bold one that stands out, I think, for all of us, including us on the screen, is that COVID and dealing with the pandemic, there's a lot of losses and changes that we'll talk about in a moment, that COVID and the other things that have happened in 2020, 21 that have greatly affected our lives as they collide together. There's other, these are just examples. There's other losses too, I'm sure many of you have in your mind, but these are the ones that we came up with that we tend to see with kids and with family members and adults as well. So next screen.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about kind of why we chose this topic, but also it's going to help us understand ourselves better. And so the big thing is we need to adjust to the change that has been made. And so when we lose a loved one, or with the pandemic or a job loss, there's always going to be a change. And so trying to adjust, we don't like to say accept, because sometimes that's not the right word, but making sure we can adjust to the change that is needed. Understanding our feelings of fear anger, loneliness, and helplessness. Recover and become a stronger person. After someone has dealt with grief and loss, we definitely grow into being stronger people. Learn and strengthen positive and healthy coping skills. So that's really big thing that we're going to be talking about this evening are some healthy coping skills to work through when we are dealing with grief and loss. Support others that are having a hard time. And so making sure we can help others that are going through the same things maybe we have done in the past, and understand what the heck is going on. And this is really big with ourselves, but also our students. Sometimes they're really tired, or you just don't feel right in their skin sometimes. And sometimes we have to take a second and realize what the heck is going on. And sometimes that is grief and loss.
Thanks, Bryce. So true. And I guess one of the things I really want to point out is it's really normal to be having all these uncomfortable feelings right now, because it's a human experience to have strong feelings when we lose and things all change around us. So grieving doesn't make you imperfect. It makes you human. And we have a lot of complex emotions that can surface during this time. That is for sure. So some of the losses and why, we chose this topic right now is partly because of all the losses that we see and that we feel ourselves and all the changes and adjustments we've had to make, but also our last Parent Power Hour, this came up quite a bit. Just some emotional times with parents just going, am I the only one that's feeling this way? Is my kid the only one? Are we the only family having these struggles? And it's really nice, even though there's no one here tonight, so you're just going to be watching this as a recording, but it's nice to be able to share some, common experiences that we're having. And so some of the losses, we're pointing just out some of the losses due to COVID and the pandemic. Some of the things that already know, of course, but it's just to be aware of what kids are dealing with. The social connections that they don't have, or in the same way that they're used to having with family, friends, classmates, teachers, coaches, people at church, whatever, groups they're part of outside of school. Sports, certainly students miss the competition. They miss that physical activity, the pride that they have from being part of a team, or maybe they are, a strong player and they miss that, they get that self-esteem that they get. They miss being part of a team. Nothing feels normal. Is that not, that's so true that everything is different, changing every day. Students with the schedule we have right now are really missing their electives like art, STEM, choir, band, etc. Missing clubs and other activities like Girl Scouts and church groups.
And these last four, I want to share. Boy, this next one, I've talked to lots of kids at Vista Middle School since March, and many of them have really struggled with this next one, lunchtime hanging out with my friends. What I've learned about middle school kids the last 18, 19 years I've worked in middle school, they're very kinesthetic. What I mean is they have to experience it to make it meaningful. And to be honest with you, for lots of kids, and mind you, a lot of adults, being on Zoom is not very much an experience for them. And so they miss hanging out with their friends, especially at lunchtime. It's just not quite the same. It's like singing, without a microphone versus with a microphone. And then also going to movies with friends and family, eating out, financial stress, and just a number of things that they're out of their regular routine. Their habits are changing. And so because of that, they don't have the most healthy habits, many kids, around sleeping right, because they might want to stay up and game too late, or they don't exercise like they used to. These are common things that we as a staff have seen that families, but especially kids, are struggling with in middle school.
Yeah, it's okay to not feel okay. And they may not understand what they're feeling or why. And
so I've heard people say a lot during this time of COVID that we're in the same ocean in different boats, because we're all going through these unprecedented circumstances and experiencing different things in the same ocean, you could say.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good visual. And so I'm going to talk a bit about the stages of grief, and be patient, parents. We're going to get a little bit into helping your kids cope with grief, but we're going to just do one more thing. So go ahead, Martha. Thank you. We're going to talk about the stages of grief, and just look at that for a moment before I say much, just so you can kind of study it a little bit. And parents, and maybe even kids who might be watching, just ask yourself, what does this chart mean? Just study it for a little bit and think about it. Think about it, how it might pertain to your life. And I'm going to first explain it in a different realm than what we're meaning to in terms of COVID. 13 years ago, my dad died of a sudden heart attack, and I went through obvious grief. And so I went through shock, anxiety. I didn't go through denial, but it was almost like I was in a car accident and I didn't know how to respond. It was kind of numb for 2 or 3 days, probably even longer. And then for the next 6 months to actually a year, I had a lot of those emotions in that area that says sadness, happiness, guilt, remorse, depression, anger. And I'll talk about bargaining in a moment. And it wasn't until about 6 months to a year later that I finally got to that point of adjustment. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. But most of those emotions probably make sense to you. So how does this pertain to our kiddos, since especially last March with COVID and all these things we just spoke of in the last few slides? They have a lot of those emotions, probably not all of them, but some of them. Sadness, I'm not seeing my friends. Depression, because I'm just away from my friends and or just doing my normal routine. And let me explain what bargaining is. This one applies a little bit more to areas of death and other things. Bargaining means, if only I would have done this, this wouldn't have happened. So for myself, if I only would have done this, this, and this, my dad wouldn't have died. None of that was true, but I sure felt that way. Parents, I want to really emphasize that what we see in a lot of middle school kids when they're grieving is anger. I view anger as a secondary emotion. So they're feeling sad that they can't see their friends. They're feeling powerless. That would be in the question mark because they can't see their friends. But what they show us, especially probably parents, is anger. Anger is a very valid emotion, but it's almost always secondary to something else. What does adjustment mean? We'll kind of move on after this. Adjustment means that we are doing better and we're feeling better about it, even though it's still grief. So for example, my dad's death, I still miss my dad. There's still a void in my heart that he's not in my life anymore, but I'm doing better. I don't think about him every day like I did 13, 12 years ago. And so I'm doing better in terms of that. And so those are the different stages. It doesn't mean that we have to have all of those emotions, but I think that describes our country, us as adults, and also our kids, especially since this last March. Anything else, Martha or Bryce or Terry, that you want to add before we move on?
I think the one thing I wanted to add was, Mike, you hit on it at the last little bit, but the reason that this chart looks this way is because there's no right or wrong way to work through grief and loss. And so you're going to see an arrow going from change to shock, but it also goes straight to that big box where all those other emotions are led. And so we just want to make sure whatever grief and loss stages you are working through or your students are working through, it's okay, because there's really no right or wrong way to get to that adjustment stage.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that we all go through grief differently.
Yes.
I mean, all these emotions that Mr. Black has listed here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to all go through them, and we might go through them differently. And I do agree with Mike definitely about the anger as one that we surely see with middle school kids.
And before we move on, Terry, you mentioned the word through. The one thing though that's important for all of us, and kids especially, is it's important that we walk through those emotions, because if we don't get to adjustment, and therefore kids can self-medicate, they can maybe not graduate from high school. It's important that we walk through these, and in a moment we're going to talk about the different ways to do that.
It's a good point. And I think the adjustment of like all of us, like it still feels weird to go into my office and not see kids in the building, but I've adjusted to it and I've figured out how to do my job, and I'm doing the best I can under the circumstances. Do I want it to go back to the way it was? Yes, but I've adjusted, and I'm not stuck in feeling sad all the time. I still miss the kids. I'm not angry. I'm not, so it's kind of what we're talking about here. So.
Good.
All right. Mike, for you.
Now we're going to talk about coping skills. So how can we help our kiddos and also ourselves?
Yeah, so we want to talk about some healthy ways to cope with our grief and loss. And so, something that we really like to do on these parent power hours is making sure our families are walking away with some guidance or in some steps that they can do, an action plan. And so, these are kind of some healthy ways our parents and our students can help grief or cope with grief and loss. And so, making sure we give ourselves space for self-reflection, but also reflecting with others, acknowledging your pain. And so this is what Mike was really talking about, is working through all those stages and acknowledging with where we're at and what has gone on. A big one that we want to talk about is taking care of yourself physically and emotionally. Most of the time when we are dealing with grief and loss, the first thing to go is our physical self. We stop eating healthy, we stop exercising, going out. We really like to just like sit there, and that is okay for a little bit. We give ourselves grace with that grace period of just soaking it in, but then we want to make sure that we get back to our routine of taking care of ourselves physically and emotionally. It's important to have something to look forward to, and so making sure we plan something in the future that we can get a little bit excited about. And right now with COVID, that is really hard because we are nervous that plans are going to be changed. And so try to make a plan with you and your family that we know for sure won't be let down. That could be a Zoom call here, that could be a hike somewhere, something that we know isn't going to be shut down. Is really important. So building plans that are secure. So that's kind of what I just was touching on, and normalizing the ups and downs of emotions. And so when we were talking about that stages of griefs, realize that some of them were happiness, and then it was sadness and anger, and then maybe happiness again and shock. And so realizing that those emotions do go up and down when we are dealing with grief and loss, and that, like Mike and Terry were saying, that there's no right or wrong way, and everyone deals with it in their own way. But also a great way to cope with grief and loss is making sure we find ways to have fun. So that can be movie night, games, dancing in your kitchen, singing. Finding times to just laugh with your family is really important. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to add with that?
That's good.
No, I think it's good. Me too. Thanks, Bryce.
All right. I was going to take the slide. Is that right?
Yeah, if you can, whoops, sorry about that.
Great. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
You can share it, but
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys can add to it.
doesn't matter. We're all good, Mike.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do. So
I love this first bullet, parents. I love this first bullet. As soon as we get back to it, is that holding space for them to share is such a good statement. I love that phrase. I'm going to steal it many times. And so when kids are grieving, parents, adults, it's really important that for the most part, we listen and then give advice later. Sometimes not even get advice. I know for me with kids, when they're anxious or when they're dealing with grief, especially, I'm mostly there just to listen. So holding space for them to share. And if any of you have raised adolescents, which I have, timing is everything. Sometimes they're not going to want to share. They're not in the mood. They're too grumpy. They're too hungry. So timing is everything with them. So holding space for them to share. Secondly, reaching out to family and friends through phone calls or Zoom. This is, again, them doing that. Writing cards or letters to family and friends. They need to realize that, yes, they might be grieving, but life is more than just about themselves. So they might write a birthday card to an aunt or uncle or grandma or something. Encourage your students to turn on their cameras during Zoom meetings. This is really important because it's important that teachers get to know them, and that although kids are self-conscious about seeing themselves, that's one reason why they keep their videos off. They will get used to that, most of them. And so it's important that we encourage them to the camera to turn their Zoom meetings. And practically speaking, I say that on behalf of the teachers, because these poor teachers see 30 kids with their screens off, and that's really hard to teach. So that's the other side of it. These last 4 bullets are really important. Many kids need to be active to engage in sports, running, trampoline. I can assure you this, parents, that if your kids are exercising on a regular basis, it is going to help their grief process. It helps them to cope with their depression, their anger, all those yucky feelings that come with grief. I cannot tell you how important exercise is. And yet that's the last thing we want to do when we're grieving, most of us, me included. Important that they have a routine or school. We talked about that the last Parent Power Hour and back in December, but it's important that they have a routine, not just about school stuff, but also about chores and doing other things and then giving them free time. Mindfulness is very important, and those other things you see on the screen. When they are struggling, this goes back to the first bullet, listen before giving advice, unless they're being disrespectful, of course. But it's really important just to listen and just be there for them, especially one-on-one. And then, of course, connecting with their peers. If there's creative ways that can do that through whatever that might be is really important. Anything else that any of you would like to add before we move on? So the thing I'd like to say to all of you is that, especially those of us who are parents that want to be these perfect parents, please know that we don't expect you to do every single one of these bullets. My challenge to each of you is that you pick maybe 2 or 3 that you could do more of or continue to do, but don't feel like you have to do every single one of these, because guess what? It probably wouldn't work, because that wouldn't work for your kid, right? And so pick 2 or 3, 4 at the most that you could do more of. So.
And I think if we had some families here tonight, they would be sharing some things that they've done to help their kids get connected. I know I was talking to a teacher friend of mine that they, of course, they FaceTime with their friends, and they, well, I was just, sorry, I was thinking 2 thoughts, but they FaceTime with friends, but they do have 1 or 2 friends that it's okay that they mask up and they're safe, but they can see each other outside, maybe skateboarding or riding bikes. Just a way to get out and do other things, to be out of the house and connecting with friends, because they live in a place where they can do that. And then also connecting with each other as a parent-child, like making food together, or you were talking earlier, Mike, about doing Legos or Playmobil with one of your children, just something that you can do together to feel connected. So I just wanted to mention those.
And can I just share something real quick? I talked to a friend of mine last night, and while he's an adult, he shared about something he was going to be struggling with this week, and I was there to support him. And I listened, then I gave some insights. And after we processed stuff, he was able to start thinking clearly. And that's what happens when we have someone to listen. It unclogs the mind so we can think more clearly about something. And that's what we do for kids when they're grieving. So I just wanted to state that.
Well, I also was thinking about connecting with peers, and I wanted to pitch, advertise our lunch group that we have at Horizon Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. It's Grub Club, and it's mentioned on the Counselor Canvas page. We also have Prideful Friends, LGBTQ+ group that happens on Wednesdays. Bryce and Jackie just started there's some small groups happening. So there are other ways to connect. That's all on Zoom, like the lunch group, et cetera, is on Zoom, but we have the same kids come every day. And I don't think, Bryce, I don't think they all knew each other beforehand. But when we return to the building, because they're different grades, there's a lot of 6th, 1 7th, and a few 8th. I mean, they're going to know each other. And I don't know. I mean, there are ways to connect with friends. So, yeah. And
Right. So how do we cultivate hope in this hard time? Hope's actually a science which says that the combination of goals, agency, and the pathways to get there equals hope. In day-to-day, helping get students connected, finding ways to cope, basically all that we've been talking about and all the incredible ways you're supporting your children already is all a part of hope. It can look like having an adult mentor for your child, creating a schedule and routine together that works for you and your family. And hope also emerges when we're able to creatively express in a format that works for us. So that could be art or playing Legos or talking to someone. We can ask our students what works best for them. And affirming your child's progress, finding successes and things to celebrate no matter what can increase their sense of hopefulness overall.
And can I just share something, Jackie?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I want to share with parents that, and Martha, I'd love to hear your insights, that not every kid, especially boys, are really into talking. They don't always like to talk to process feelings. So I want to really emphasize that second to last bullet, that for some students, Legos, music, art, even Minecraft, which is a form of Legos, if you will, that is just as therapeutic as talking, if not even more for some kids. So your language of help for kids isn't always talking. There's other means too. So I just want to really emphasize that.
That's a great point. We just had a student today at Grub Club that had, that's what's our lunch group, had just gotten a new sketch pad. And we have another student that they come every time and they're drawing the entire time. And sometimes they talk and sometimes they're just there doing their art during Grub Club and they're not alone. I mean, it's a really cool experience for me that they're there. So.
All right, so I'm going to share a couple of resources. The first one is Our Treehouse, which is a local grief resource for youth that are experiencing grief from death of a loved one. They have a bunch of different programming going on through COVID, including biweekly virtual peer support groups, online forums, individual phone call check-ins, and other grief resources. There's also 7 Cups, which is free online chatting with trained active listeners. And this is really great if you or your student needs to chat with someone right away. There's different languages and affinity groups, different ages and more. They also have a lot of great mental health resources on their website. And there's also Bridget Collins, which is a local family support center, and their website has a lot of information about the programs they offer to families. One of the main things is parenting workshops. And then the National Alliance for Grieving Children is another grief education resource, and it can connect you to other local resources.
That's great. Thanks, Jackie. That's awesome. And so now if there was people here, which there's not, we would have a little Q&A, but I just wanted to let you look at the slide. Be negative only makes a difficult journey more difficult. You may be given a cactus, but you don't have to sit on it. So wish it was that easy sometimes. And thanks for coming and have a great night. And I will, when it's darkest, you can see the stars. So I'm going to stop my share. But I'll keep recording so that we can say goodbye. But we can all stay on and I'll stop my recording. But thanks for coming, everybody. And don't hesitate. I don't know if anybody has anything else to want to say. Don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. If you watched this video and you thought, oh, that was really interesting. I wish I'd like to know more about that. Or what are some other ways that my child can connect? If you're looking and wanting just some other ideas, feel free to reach out to us and we can share what other parents have been telling us or what we're finding our students tell us or just our experience. So.
And then if I could add is that if you find that your student is grieving, not just from COVID, but also maybe something that happened 3 or 4 years ago or abuse or something, please reach out to any one of us. Probably for right now would be best with Martha at Horizon, Mike Black at Vista. We're counselors. We are so good at being able to reach out to kids in the building and or through Zoom, whatever that's going to look like in February. But sometimes I know my son he's 22 now, but when he was an adolescent, so often it'd be best for him to talk to somebody other than a teacher or a parent. Because most of us know who raise adolescents. We're handicapped half the time as parents. That was true of me when my son was that age. And so know that we could reach out to your kiddos to support them, even if it was something that happened years ago in terms of death or divorce or something like that. So reach out to us, email's best, and we'd be happy to meet with your kiddo to support him or her.
Anybody else have some last words before I stop recording?
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.